When you walk away from a woman, not out of anger, not to manipulate her, not even to punish her, but because you've realized your self-worth and you've stopped tolerating disrespect, something remarkable happens. Especially when you walk away in silence, with composure, without the need for theatrics or emotional collapse. That single act, that decision to leave without screaming for closure or demanding to be seen, plants a psychological imprint that is far more powerful than any words could ever be. You see, most people are predictable in emotional situations. When relationships crumble, the expected response is desperation, texting late at night, calling too often, reaching out through mutual friends, posting online in the hopes of being noticed. That's the usual dance. But when you don't do that, when you remove yourself calmly, as though your dignity weighs more than your desire for attention, it catches her off guard. And that moment is when the imprint begins. Because she expected you to crumble. She expected you to beg. She expected to see the version of you that needed her to validate his worth. And instead you gave her something else. An empty space where your chaos should have been. That absence speaks volumes. That absence becomes deafening. It says you have standards. It says you have self-respect. And it says, more than anything, that you are not like the others who get trapped in emotional limbo, waiting for breadcrumbs of affection. And here's the part she never anticipated, how loud your silence would be. When a man leaves without bitterness, without resentment, without needing to declare himself the victim, it forces a woman to reflect in a way that accusations and arguments never will. Silence has a strange way of becoming a mirror, and when a woman stares into that mirror long enough, she starts to see the parts of herself that she tried to ignore. The ways she disrespected you, the moment she tested your boundaries, the quiet dismissals, the rolling eyes, the snide comments, they all come back at night when she's alone, when the world is quiet and the distractions have dimmed. There you are, not in body but in presence. And your calm exit replays in her mind over and over again, not because you were dramatic, but because you weren't. Not because you shouted, but because you didn't. You left in a way that didn't invite pity or chase. You just left. And that haunts her. Because now she has to wonder. She has to sit with her own unanswered questions. Why didn't he fight for me? Why didn't he chase me? Why was he able to let me go so easily? And what she's really asking, underneath all of that, is this: why wasn't I enough to make him stay? That question eats at her because it's not about you anymore. It's about her reflection in your silence. It's about the version of herself she revealed in your presence and how you responded, not with rage, but with withdrawal, with distance, with indifference. And the ego can't process indifference easily. Anger, it understands. Jealousy, it can interpret. Even rejection in some twisted way can be justified. But indifference cuts deeper because it means you weren't trying to prove anything anymore. You weren't holding on. You weren't even trying to be remembered. You simply decided that her value in your life had expired. And that level of self-control, that level of emotional mastery, is both terrifying and intriguing to someone who's used to being chased. Now, every time she thinks of you, whether it's a song, a scent, or an old photo, she's not just remembering you, she's remembering how she lost you. And more than that, she's remembering how you didn't make a scene when you left. That memory burns because it doesn't allow her to feel superior. It doesn't allow her to believe she had the final word. Instead, it forces her to sit with the realization that she pushed away a man who didn't need her approval to walk into the next chapter of his life. That's the secret most men don't understand. The moment you choose to walk away with dignity, not with bitterness or games, but with strength, you stop becoming a memory she can manipulate. You become a presence she can't erase. A man who can walk away without crumbling is a man who haunts the mind, not because he begged to be remembered, but because he made peace with being forgotten. That's what makes him unforgettable. And so if you ever wonder why she thinks about you at night, long after the texts have stopped and the calls have ended, it's not because you left dramatically. It's because you didn't. You left with calm. You left with clarity. And that's exactly why you never left her mind. A woman remembers how you made her feel more than anything else. Not what you bought her, not the places you went, not even the things you said. It's how she felt in your presence that lingers in her mind, especially at night when her defenses are down and her mind has the room to wander. And the most haunting feeling of all is the sense of being truly seen, because that's something rare. That's what you gave her, and she knows it. You saw her beneath the image she tried to portray to the world, beneath the mask of perfection, beneath the curated smiles and social performance. You saw the scared girl hiding behind ambition, the one who was terrified of being hurt, of being abandoned, of not being enough. And you didn't run, you didn't judge, you didn't exploit her softness. Instead, you stayed calm, present, attentive. That's not the kind of thing a woman forgets, even if she pretends to. Even if she walked away from you or thought she found something better, there's a part of her that quietly compares everything that came after to the way she felt when she was with you. And when those new experiences don't measure up, and they rarely do, she begins to remember more clearly. The memory stops being distorted by emotion or ego. It sharpens. It becomes real again. Most people, in truth, never get to feel emotionally safe. Especially in modern relationships, it's all performance, testing an image. But when a man brings stillness into a woman's life, when he listens instead of fixing, when he responds instead of reacts, something unusual happens. She relaxes into his presence. Her nervous system calms down. She breathes more easily. And that imprint, that emotional imprint of peace, cannot be easily replaced. She may have taken it for granted when she had it. It's not uncommon. Often we don't recognize the weight someone carried for us until we're forced to carry it alone. When a man can hold space without constantly needing attention, without overreacting to her storms, without being thrown off by her chaos, he becomes a reference point. And if he leaves, especially if he leaves because she stopped valuing that presence, he becomes a ghost, not the kind that haunts with fear, but the kind that lingers with longing. It doesn't matter what she's posting. It doesn't matter how she's presenting herself publicly. Even if she's laughing, even if she's dating again, even if she's appearing completely unaffected, there's still a quiet moment at night when the world turns off and her thoughts catch up. And in that space, she remembers how she used to feel in your presence. The emotional safety, the steadiness, the clarity, and she compares it with the emotional noise she's facing now. That comparison is involuntary. It's visceral. It's not about nostalgia. It's about nervous system memory. And the body doesn't lie. She remembers when she was insecure or spiraling or unsure and didn't make it about you. She remembers when you saw her walls and chose not to fight them, but to wait patiently for her to lower them herself. She remembers how you didn't chase her when she tried to provoke you into proving your worth. You didn't play the game. You didn't validate her manipulations. Instead, you kept your center, and that, more than anything, is what returns to her when she lies in the dark, unable to sleep. Because every woman meets a man who destabilizes her, makes her feel anxious, triggers her insecurities, keeps her guessing. And she may chase that for a while, but eventually she realizes that it leaves her exhausted. Eventually, she remembers the one man who didn't drain her, the one man who held presence without performance, who saw her not the version she tried to be, but who she was underneath. That memory becomes sacred over time, especially when the world grows louder, shallower, more chaotic. The man who could sit in silence and make her feel understood, he becomes more valuable in hindsight. And while she may not reach out, while pride and ego might keep her from ever admitting it, she thinks about you. She replays the moments. She wonders what it would have looked like if she had met you later when she was ready, or if she hadn't sabotaged what you were building, or if she hadn't mistaken peace for boredom and steadiness for a lack of passion. It's a cruel irony. Sometimes we lose the person who made us feel the safest simply because we didn't yet feel safe within ourselves. But time changes things. Growth brings clarity. And the older she gets, the more she realizes how rare it was to feel truly seen, truly accepted, and gently challenged to rise. So no matter how much distance there is now or how much time has passed, know this: if you were the man who made her feel emotionally understood and safe, she thinks about you at night. And it's not the big gestures she remembers, it's the way she could finally breathe in your presence. It's a strange thing how someone can say they're over you, claim they've moved on, and yet somehow when the lights are out and the distractions have faded, their thoughts drift back to you. And often what draws those thoughts isn't the dramatic moments, not the intense arguments or even the deep conversations. It's the subtle things, the little rituals, the familiar tone of your voice, the way you said her name when you were being playful or serious, the ordinary patterns you shared, like the way you looked at her when she wasn't speaking, or the way you sat beside her in silence without the need to fill the air with meaningless words. Those tiny moments burrow themselves into the subconscious, and at night, when the noise of the world dies down, those memories start to echo again. That's what she remembers. Not just the grand gestures or the carefully curated images, but the genuine, almost invisible familiarity that formed between the two of you. Because there's something powerful about having a rhythm with another human being. Something intimate about being known, not in the shallow way that most people know each other, but known in that quiet, day-to-day consistency. And once a woman's had that with someone, once she's tasted the comfort of not having to perform in order to be loved, that becomes the baseline against which she measures every new experience. It's easy to chase novelty when you're restless, to go looking for attention or validation or some kind of excitement that masks the deeper ache. But eventually the novelty wears off, the thrill fades, and all that's left is the reality of whether or not someone gets you, really gets you. That's when she starts comparing again, not because she wants to, but because her body remembers what it felt like to be understood without having to explain herself. She remembers the ease, the unspoken language, the simple joy of knowing you were there, not always saying the right thing, not always fixing her problems, but just there, present, consistent. And what makes that memory even more potent is when it wasn't perfect, when there were struggles, when it wasn't easy. Because there's something even more meaningful about someone who sticks around, who shows up, who fights through difficulty, not with control or chaos, but with clarity and strength. She remembers that. She remembers the way you didn't try to manipulate her or guilt her or chase her when she pulled away. Instead, you gave her space, you kept your integrity, you didn't try to force a connection, you let her be. And in doing so, you revealed a rare kind of strength, the kind that says, I care, but I won't lose myself trying to prove it. And that haunts her in the best way, because every time she encounters someone who lacks that steadiness, someone who needs constant reassurance or validation, or who panics in silence, she remembers the calm you carried. That grounded presence. That's what makes her think about you late at night when the noise of the day is gone and she's left alone with her thoughts. There's a pull back to that place where she felt emotionally regulated, where she wasn't constantly second-guessing herself, where she didn't feel like she had to earn affection through performance, even if she wouldn't admit it. Even if she's told her friends a different story or convinced herself you didn't really matter or crafted a version of events that makes her feel more in control of the ending, her body knows the truth. Her nervous system remembers who she was with you, and the memory of that calm, that security, starts to surface, not with a loud shout, but with a whisper, a quiet ache, a gentle realization that you weren't trying to trap her, you were just present. And that's not easy to find, because so much of what passes for connection these days is just projection. Two people playing roles, seeking validation, feeding egos. But you didn't play that game. You weren't trying to become her fantasy. You were trying to be real, steady, and in a world that often rewards surface-level charm over depth, she might have walked away. She might have chosen the glitter over the gold. But the mind has a way of catching up to the soul. And at night, when the world has quieted, the soul begins to speak. That's when she starts to feel it, that pull, that ache, not for attention, not for drama, but for presence. For the way she felt when you were simply in the room, the way your silence was more comforting than most people's words, the way your eyes told the truth when your mouth stayed shut, the way you made her feel seen without asking her to explain herself. It's that feeling that wakes her sometimes, That keeps her tossing in bed, wondering if she made a mistake, wondering if what she was looking for was in front of her all along. And whether or not you ever tells you, whether or not you ever hear it from her lips, you need to know. She remembers. And she thinks about it far more than you'd ever guess. It's remarkable how the human mind works, especially when it comes to memory, emotional memory to be precise. And one of the things we often underestimate is the power of an unresolved story. See, when you step away from someone, especially a woman who once felt something deep for you, you leave behind more than silence. You leave a gap in the narrative, a question that hasn't been answered, a sentence left unfinished. And that kind of emotional incompletion, whether we acknowledge it or not, can become an echo chamber inside the mind, especially late at night. She might try to fill that space with distractions, new faces, louder friends, endless scrolling, but eventually it quiets down, and what's left is the question, why did it end like that? Not because you disappeared in chaos, or because you created a spectacle, but because you didn't chase, you didn't beg, you didn't write long emotional explanations, you just stepped back respectfully, intentionally, and that's the part that sticks with her. Because there's a difference between walking away with bitterness and walking away with peace. One feels like an explosion, the other feels like a mystery. And the human psyche is obsessed with solving mysteries. She replays your last conversation. She scans the messages. She tries to read between the lines of your silence, analyzing what wasn't said, hoping it might tell her more than what was. And she doesn't do this because she wants to reopen the door necessarily. She does it because she wants to make sense of something that doesn't sit comfortably in her spirit. That's the thing about composure. When a man walks away with his dignity intact, when he doesn't resort to desperation or manipulation, it creates a weight, an emotional weight, that's hard to shake off. You didn't blow up her phone. You didn't show up uninvited. You didn't try to convince her why she should value you again. You just let her go, not out of anger, but out of clarity. That tells her something. It tells her that you didn't need her validation to define your worth. And that's unsettling. Not in a cruel way, but in a way that forces reflection. Because for many people, especially those used to controlling the emotional tone of a relationship, your refusal to play the game becomes a mirror. It reflects back the emotional maturity she may have lacked. It reveals the imbalance of effort, the parts she overlooked, the respect she may have taken for granted. And suddenly, the man she thought she could walk away from without consequence becomes the man who quietly haunts her thoughts. That's what happens when you don't flinch in the face of rejection. When you maintain emotional composure instead of spiraling into chaos, you plant a seed. And that seed grows into curiosity, into doubt, into late night wonderings and what if scenarios. Because even if she's convinced herself that she made the right choice, the dignity with which you handled her departure makes her second guess the story she's told herself. It's not about playing mind games or trying to manipulate the outcome. It's about knowing who you are. And that knowledge, that self-respect, creates a vacuum, a space where she expects noise and receives silence, where she expected pursuit and got peace. And that space communicates strength. Your lack of reaction speaks volumes. Your lack of reaction speaks volumes. She wonders why you didn't fight harder, why you didn't try to win her back. And the answer, which she may not be ready to admit, is this: you didn't have to, because the man who knows his value doesn't beg for love. He doesn't cling to someone who's drifting. He lets go, even when it hurts. Not because he doesn't feel, but because he refuses to be owned by those feelings. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to make someone miss you, that's often when they do. Because true longing isn't born from pressure or pleading. It's born from presence. The kind of presence that lingers even after you've left the room. The kind that stays in her chest like a quiet question. What did I lose? That's what she wrestles with now. Not because you were perfect, not because everything was smooth, but because you didn't lower yourself to chase what wasn't being offered freely. You made peace with the distance, and in doing so, you left her with something far more powerful than words. You left her with silence wrapped in strength. And that's what she keeps turning over in her mind night after night. The strength you showed by not needing to be chosen. And that's what makes her remember you, not just as someone she used to know, but as someone she may never fully forget. When a woman begins to realize that her assumptions about you were wrong, it doesn't happen in a single moment. It's not a dramatic epiphany followed by immediate regret. It's subtle, and it creeps in slowly, like a realization that grows roots in the silence you've left behind. And the catalyst for that realization, more often than not, is contrast. Contrast between who she thought you were and who you actually are. Between how she expected you to react and how you chose to carry yourself. She may have expected you to crumble, to lash out, to spiral emotionally when she pulled away or withdrew her affection, but you didn't. You didn't plead, you didn't perform, you didn't reduce yourself to a man begging for scraps of attention. Instead, you became even more composed. You focused inward, you moved forward. That's unsettling, not because it's a power move, but because it reveals something undeniable. She misunderstood the man she thought she knew. And that revelation, it shakes her. Because so much of our perception of others is based on the roles we assign them. She thought you were dependent, emotionally fragile, perhaps overly invested. But now, through your absence, she begins to see something different. Strength, direction, purpose. Suddenly, she's not sure if she truly knew you at all. And that doubt, that internal tension, becomes a loop in her mind she can't shut off. Because when someone rewrites the story we've told ourselves about them, we're forced to revisit everything, every interaction, every assumption, every judgment. This is the irony. You didn't have to explain it to her. You didn't have to argue or try to correct her image of you. You just lived in such a way that her image couldn't stand against the evidence. She saw the shift. She felt the distance. And in that distance, she started to question everything. She asks herself, was I too quick to dismiss him? Did I overlook something valuable? These aren't questions born from guilt. They're born from clarity. And clarity often comes in the quiet, not the chaos. She starts to notice how other men around her lack what you possessed in silence. Emotional discipline, authenticity, self-respect. And the longer you remain consistent, the more undeniable that contrast becomes. You're not reacting to her, you're not watching her stories, liking her pictures, or orbiting her world from a distance. You're not trying to leave a breadcrumb trail back to you. You're absent, and in that absence, your value begins to rise in her eyes. You see, people don't miss what they never appreciated, they miss what they underestimated. And if she ever undervalued you, now she begins to wrestle with that. It gnaws at her, not because you're unreachable, but because she finally realizes she never fully saw you to begin with. And that's painful. That's the kind of pain that sits with someone when the lights go out and the distractions fade away, when there's nothing left but their thoughts and the echo of who you were to them. But it's not about revenge. It's not about making her regret or punishing her for misjudging you. That's a hollow pursuit. The deeper truth here is that your growth, your calm, your refusal to seek validation from someone who couldn't see you clearly, that's what redefines the narrative. You didn't just change her perception of you, you forced her to look at herself, to ask why she didn't see the value before, and sometimes that's the most uncomfortable question of all. Because if she was wrong about you, what else has she been wrong about? How many good things has she pushed away? How many genuine people has she misunderstood because she projected her own fears or expectations onto them? That's the storm you've left her in. Not one of drama, but one of deep internal reckoning. And that's the storm that doesn't pass quickly. So you don't need to chase closure. You don't need her to say she was wrong. The truth speaks loud enough through her silence, her lingering attention, her sudden interest in your life again. That's what people do when they realize they got it wrong. They hover, they observe, they wonder if the door they closed might still be open. But you don't need to open it again, because your journey isn't about proving your worth to anyone who couldn't see it from the start. It's about becoming the kind of man who knows his worth so deeply it becomes impossible to ignore. And that's the moment she realizes the real you was never the version she imagined. The real you was the one who walked away with strength, with purpose, with peace. And that version, that's the one she never truly understood until it was too late. There's a fascinating truth that emerges when you finally step back from someone who no longer sees your value. It's not immediate. It doesn't come rushing in like a wave. It creeps in quietly, like a shadow slowly stretching across the floor as the sun begins to set. Because when your presence is consistent, familiar, predictable, it becomes easy to overlook. But the moment your energy vanishes, your silence becomes the loudest sound in her world. And that silence starts to speak volumes she can't ignore. She begins to wonder, not because you left chaos behind, not because you threw blame or lashed out, but because you left peace. And that peace, ironically, becomes unsettling. Because peace doesn't beg, it doesn't chase, it doesn't try to explain or justify itself. It simply exits with dignity. And when you leave like that, you rob her of the narrative she might have been preparing in her mind. Maybe she thought you'd be angry. Maybe she expected you to spiral, to reach out in desperation, to keep orbiting her world like a satellite lost in space. But you didn't. You didn't give her the reaction she expected. And in doing so, you gave her something far more powerful: space for reflection. That's when it starts to hit her. When she realizes you're not coming back with apologies or emotional outbursts, you're not trying to reclaim her attention, you're not trying to remind her of what you once were. Instead, you've let go. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. And that's what begins to haunt her. Not the things you said, but the things you didn't. Not the arguments you had, but the fact that you're no longer around to even have them. In your absence, she starts to recall all the little things. The subtle ways you showed up for her, the calm in your voice, the way you supported her even when you didn't have the words for it. Those memories begin to form a new picture, one she might have never seen while you were still there. Because the truth is, it's hard to see the weight of something while you're still holding it. Only when you put it down, only when it's gone, do people start to feel what they lost. And this realization doesn't just happen once, it revisits her over and over, like a melody that plays in the background of her life. She might not talk about it, she might even pretend it doesn't affect her. But it's there, quietly intruding on her thoughts when she's alone, when her phone buzzes and it's not you, when she hears a song that reminds her of the time you spent together, when she's with someone new and suddenly sees the contrast, the moments of discomfort where she finds herself thinking, he never would have done that, or that's not how it used to feel. You see, when you maintain your silence, when you refuse to reinsert yourself into a place that failed to appreciate you, you don't just preserve your dignity, you amplify your presence. You become a mirror, not of who she is now, but of what she missed. And the hardest part about that reflection is that it forces her to see herself without the cushion of blame. She has to ask the hard questions. Why did she pull away? Well, what was she chasing that felt more important? And most painfully, was it even real? That kind of internal dialogue is relentless, because the deeper she goes, the more she begins to realize it wasn't your absence that's painful. It's the contrast between who you were and who she's now surrounded by. She remembers how you made her feel safe, not just emotionally, but existentially. You were grounded, stable, aware, and when she starts seeing through the superficialities around her, she begins to understand that what you offered wasn't common, it wasn't disposable, it was rare, and now it's gone. But you're not gone because you're trying to teach her a lesson. You're not absent to get a reaction. You're simply moving forward, aligned with your own truth, unwilling to compromise your self-respect for temporary attention. And that, more than anything, is what makes her break down. Because she realizes you didn't just let her go, you outgrew the need to be understood by someone who refused to see you clearly in the first place. You became the silence that forced her to listen, and now, no matter how far she runs or how many distractions she gathers, she can't outrun what that silence says, because it speaks louder than words ever could, and it doesn't lie.